Welcome back. Hello, my friend.
Hello, my friend.
You ready to continue on?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. This is America's Future Series Defense Innovation Summit. We're delighted to welcome you. We trust you have enjoyed thus far. We've been here since about 7:30 this morning, Eastern Time, 6:30 Central Time. So indeed, it has been a long day for those of us here in Dallas, Texas, for sure.
Full day, yes, sir.
We're coming to you live from Murray Media Studios. Thank you so much for being a part of what we hope is a very informative, very entertaining, educational day. Our next gentleman that I'm going to introduce to you is Russ Long. He's the founder and CEO of Long Capture. He established this company in October of 2017. So it's not that old, not even 4 years old as yet, coming up on that. Currently resides in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and that's what he calls home. He brings amazing leadership skills as well as acquisition experience and a strong company vision to his team. Now, before creating Long Capture, he earned his bachelor's in management from the United States Air Force Academy, oddly enough, in Colorado Springs, where he now resides, as well as his master's in entrepreneurship from Oklahoma State University. Also served for 5.5 years in the active duty Air Force. In his free time, he enjoys writing music, traveling, reading, drinking bourbon, all right, video games, and hiking, backpacking. So a man of many talents. One fun fact about him is that he once played a saxophone solo to Smoke on the Water during a trip to Switzerland. I wonder if he can do a little something for us today or not.
Yeah, we have him come back tomorrow. He's doing an entire set.
Well, I tell you what, Russ, we're most impressed. That's quite the bio, my friend.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
You want to hum a little Smoke on the Water for us, or are you going to just get right to it?
I'm going to have to pass
right.
at this time.
All right. We're going to hold you to it, though.
Well, thank you for being a sponsor, Russ. I really want to appreciate you and Long Capture for being part of this program and helping support it. And we would love people, of course, to learn a little bit more about you and your organization.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity. So we at Long Capture, what we focus on are the billions of dollars of funding in small business programs that are targeted at tech startups and dual use technologies, these small businesses that have a great technology that they're trying to bring from oftentimes commercial use cases into the Department of Defense and the federal government. So we're a team of about 30 veterans, mostly veterans and military spouses. So we have this deep understanding of how the Department of Defense works. And a lot of us come from the contracting and acquisition career field. So we've sat on the other side of the table, often as active duty members in the Air Force, Navy, Marines. So we bring, again, that experience and knowledge of the nuts and bolts of how the acquisition process works and how the government likes to do business, which is a little bit different than the private sector. So overall, we help our clients, these tech startups, kind of through the entire process, from writing that first SBIR phase 1 proposal to get that initial win. And under this, especially Air Force SBIR program, we're able to grab sole source authority so that we're not going into these really competitive, source selection type environments down the road. We're able to just work with the government and federal customer on a one-on-one sole source basis, which is a huge advantage in this space if you know a little bit about how the government likes to do business. So overall, if you want to reach out to us, I'll drop my link for LinkedIn in the chat. I have Roger hanging out in the chat as well, one of my team members, and so we'll be around. So thanks again for this opportunity, letting us play a small part of this event.
Well, glad to have you. It's an honor to have you with us, and we appreciate the work that you do because you are the enabler, you're the catalyst for this kind of innovation, and it's exactly what these small innovative startups need, is someone to be the Sherpa guide and walk them through the maze and take them to the top of the mountain. So we appreciate what you do.
Absolutely. And so at this time, I'm going to go ahead and introduce David Mroczka. So David Mroczka is president and CEO of AI Strategy Corporation. AI Strategy's flagship product, 9High, is an AI-driven decision support platform for product technology development and deployment. Dave has previously operated several businesses, including the largest privately owned DoD test and development laboratory in the US. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction, Russ. Appreciate that. Yeah, we've got a great lineup here today for America's Future Series, and one I wanted to just start off by thanking America's Future Series for making this possible and bringing this panel together. We've got 4 panelists that I'll introduce here in a moment as soon as they come up online. And what we're really going to be talking about today is really how innovation can really create a much better competitive advantage for the U.S. by sort of breaking down barriers and by improving collaboration. So what we have here among the panelists, we have Brigadier General Robert Guidry with the Army's 75th Innovation Command, sort of giving us a perspective from the Army as well as from some industrial work that he's done. We have Mike Madsen from DIU, give us a great overview of what DIU is doing to help out the government. We have Mr. Anu Gupta, and he's the Chief Technology Officer of Microsoft, as well as David Koch from DLA. So we've got folks from sort of all different walks of the DoD hemisphere here, and really very interested in talking about how they all work independently, and then how we want to sort of get all the different groups from the DoD and also with industry working together. So what are those barriers that we need to address, and how do we improve collaboration? As a quick overview, we'll be going to Michael Madsen first. Again, he's the Deputy Director. Mike Madsen is the Deputy Director and Director of Strategic Engagement at the Defense Innovation Unit. Before joining DIU, Mike was the Executive Director for Section 809 Congressional Advisory Panel on streamlining acquisitions. Prior to that, Mike served for 22 years in the U.S. Air Force and retired as a decorated combat pilot. Brigadier Robert Guidry is the Deputy CG for the Army 75th Innovation Command. Rob Guidry is the Deputy Commanding General of the 75th Innovation Command, a unit which recruits technical talent from across the Army Reserve and provides these soldiers to assist innovation and modernization across the Army and across the DoD. He's a former aviator, special operations officer, and in his civilian role is also founder and CEO of Equitas Corporation. Great industrial carryover there. Mr. Anu Gupta is the Chief Technology Officer for Aerospace and Defense within Microsoft's federal DoD practice. Microsoft's mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. He is a trained material scientist, over 17 years in manufacturing information technology realms, as far as including procurement engineering and also some work in nuclear propulsion. Mr. David Koch is the Director of Research and Development for the Defense Logistics Agency. DLA's mission is to deliver readiness and lethality to the warfighter and support our nation through quality, proactive global logistics. Prior to serving as the R&D Director, David served in various capacities in DLA over the last 11 years. Mr. Koch is also retired U.S. Air Force Maintenance and Logistics Officer. So welcome everybody. Thanks for being here today. Really appreciate getting you all together and having a great conversation. What we'll do is we're going to kind of go around the table with some questions, but we certainly welcome all of you to comment. What we really want is an engaging conversation here between the panelists. So sort of along the lines of collaboration and using technology to our advantage and kind of helping to break down barriers and bring organizations together. We'll start off with Mike Madsen. And Mike, just within DIU, a lot of folks aren't even familiar necessarily with what DIU is doing currently, and how you engage with companies, and also how do you coordinate with other groups, other DoD innovation units within the government?
Thanks, David. And thanks for having me, and thanks for having DIU for this very important discussion. Leveraging our comparative advantage is absolutely critical in this area of great power competition. So just to quick level set on DIU. DIU was started about 5 years ago by then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter as a way to rebuild that connected tissue between industry and government. Really get back to the roots that really birthed Silicon Valley back in the 50s, 60s, and before that. We're headquartered in Silicon Valley. We have an office in Austin, Boston, and DC. And we're centered around 6 tech focus areas: AI, ML, autonomy, human systems, commercial space, cybersecurity, and advanced energy and materials. These are the areas that we see as undergoing the greatest rate of change in the commercial sector, and we want to leverage that. And the initial mission of Ash Carter was to accelerate commercial technology to DoD, to lower those barriers of entry that you referenced before, and get the technology into the hands of the men and women in uniform. And then as we evolved and proved that out, we shifted and added to transform the capability and capacity of the department by taking on those projects that can scale across the department, across platforms and services, and then strengthen the national security innovation base, which we see as the evolution of that triangle of academia, industry, and government versus Silicon Valley back in the 50s and 60s. Now, we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary, and so we took an opportunity to look back and see what we've done and where we've come from, what's worked out and what's not. And we've been able to embrace that Silicon Valley mantra of agility, failing fast, and take note when things aren't working and move on, and prototype technology as well as methodologies, both of which have scaled across the department. We're constantly adjusting and immediately applying those lessons learned. So early on, one of the biggest things we did is we shifted to a focus on our demand side. So all of our projects start with a DoD partner with a simply stated problem statement. We get away from a requirements document. And what that allows us to do is to rapidly make changes through that prototyping stage as we leverage that dual use technology. We also want to look at the commercial entities as our partner. We want to look like other folks that they would do business with in the commercial world. So what we've done, we've developed our project cycle based upon the commercial technology development cycle. So we focus on speed, we focus on maximizing competition, and we focus on minimizing vendor time to participate, because we found those long timelines were a barrier to entry to a lot of companies wanting to work with the department. So we work rapidly there. And we've been successful. We developed a couple internal teams to focus on that. We've been able to pull in 189 non-traditional companies. And at the same time, we have 95 cumulative projects going on right now. And we continue to focus on our transition rate. That's one of the lessons learned, is to keep focusing on that. Now, why commercial? Why the commercial technology? We found that the non-traditional companies, the top 5 tech companies outspend the traditional defense industrial base by an order of magnitude. So about $70 billion that tech companies spend by about $6 billion in R&D every year. And so we want to leverage that. And that's part of the reason that DIU was built, was to be able to do that.
And that's a stat I don't think a lot of folks are familiar with, or there may be, but putting into that kind of context, I think, is very important, because it shows scales and it shows ability of different organizations and what they can, sort of bring bear.
That's right. And we found that in that R&D that they're spending, that is where all of the technology development is happening. If you look back at history, all the technology that goes into a cell phone, overhead imagery, GPS, that was initially funded by the government and then perfected and packaged by the commercial sector. And we find all of that early development now is taking place in the commercial sector. We need to get that to the department. That's one of the reasons that DIU was developed, to lower those barriers of entry to come into the department. And so we think that we need to find ways for the department to be an early adopter of that technology. And to do that, we also work with a lot of the other folks in the innovation ecosystem you mentioned. AFWorks, DARPA is another one of those in the ecosystem that we work closely with to develop that technology and move it along. In fact, we took a cyber grand challenge from DARPA, continued developing that technology with a commercial company, and then put that on a production contract with a DoD partner. So we look to leverage what's taken place with our innovation partners across DoD, all in the context of this great power competition we're in and the tech race that we're in, which we think is the most important front, and going to need all players to help us win that.
Very good, thank you. And moving on to General Guidry, real quick. So, I mean, considering the U.S., we do lead, many of the global technology efforts, right? And but why does the DoD, often actually what they're using within their core, within the assets they have at hand, why is that technology often outdated or lagging behind, say, cutting edges that you might see like in commercial spaces? And what are some of those impediments that we need to remove to accelerate sort of not just the development, but actually the deployment and getting it out to folks?
No, that's a great question. And I wish that there was a single answer for that. I think that the problem goes deeper and is more historical. If you look at the preponderance of DoD purchases since World War II, they tended to be for things that were not available anywhere else in the world. Tanks, ships, submarines, aircraft, weapons systems, things that were not readily available in the commercial sector. So in order to ensure that we had a degree of options by our vendors, federal acquisition regulations and acquisition practices were adapted over the years to make sure that we had diversity of suppliers, so that you could choose, Lockheed could make a great military vehicle today, Raytheon could make it 5 years from now when that contract is rebid. And it wasn't really trying to stay on par or near peer with the commercial sector, but rather to acquire things that were not available anywhere else.
Right.
And we took that approach with technology in the early days of DARPANET and a lot of the technologies that were mentioned earlier with GPS and other things. But of late, and especially in the last 15, 20 years, the R&D expenditures in the commercial sector on batteries alone are 1,000 to 1 over what the U.S. Department of Defense could ever spend on R&D. So the question is, do we continue to spend R&D money on batteries, or do we buy airline tickets to the Tokyo Robotics Show and go see what they're doing? And the answer is airline tickets. Japan is fun, robots are fun, but also the point is that they're going places we haven't even thought to write an RFI for. So we are now finding ourselves with a yearning for innovation. We've created organizations like DIU, phenomenal organization, and AFWorks and SoftWorks and Army Futures Command and the 75th to spur innovation, but we're still operating within the constraints of acquisition methodologies that were truly designed for the purchasing of things that just weren't available anywhere else. And where that becomes really problematic is in the adoption of commercial technologies quickly.
Right.
It's not that we can't speed up our acquisition cycle. We have. At one point in World War II, we were awarding contracts in 60 days to make hundreds of ships, or 90 days. And somehow we lost that during the Korean and Vietnam War. And more recently, instead of 24 months from idea to contract award, it became 22 months and then 20 months and 19, where it's getting faster and faster, but we're still bound to something that you touched on, which is the impediments to buying things that already exist and that already work. And there are two of those, and I think we'll probably, we'll touch on one of them a little bit later, but one of them is color of money.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned that several times. Yeah.
That almost, not everyone can make Microsoft Office. Microsoft made Microsoft Office. And so how the heck do I give a contract for the providing of word processing and spreadsheets and the ability to make slides and make sure that any company, including socioeconomic diversity and all these other ones, how do I make sure that that happens? Well, in this particular case with Microsoft, Microsoft won over, it took them it took them decades to get there. And that's what we have. But now we have it. It's a great product. But if, a startup wanted to compete in that, it's really hard to do. So there's that sort of fine line between, I want to buy what works and what's readily accessible off of the commercial market, but I don't want to get myself into that forever scenario. And I think sometimes we take it too far, sometimes we take it not far enough, but color of money is the last thing I'll touch on. I look at, because I wear two hats, and I wear two hats. One is my military hat. The other is I do run a tech company. And so I take great interest in RFPs that come out, requests for proposals the government intends to procure. And when I look at AI and machine learning contracts that are awarded one human hour at a time, I ask myself, well, how are you going to buy artificial intelligence 1 hour at a time? I don't know how you buy anything that, in fact, it completely excludes anything that already exists, because the intellectual property can't get paid for.
Right.
And, so that is that is a problem that we need to conceptually, in my opinion, not on behalf of the Army, but in my opinion, instead of maybe 5% of an artificial intelligence contract being for stuff and not labor, we might want to consider moving that to 20%. Because if we move that 20% stuff or 25%, licenses and buying algorithms and buying software, and 75% labor, I think we're going to speed up our evolutionary advancement cycle tremendously.
And we can still have controls. We can still, enter into agreements between industry and government that we know what we're getting into, and we know that there's money allocated for different stages. But we have to look at something beyond just the current stage and make sure that the color of money or the intended spending that we have, maybe is a different way of looking at it, can actually bridge you to the next areas. Because again, we're back to the value of depth, where you'll have,
I recently,
partial funding, but not complete.
I was just looking at an RFP for a analytics platform, and it was labor. And I asked them, how do you get an analytics platform by 1 hour at a time? It does not make sense, but a lot of that stems from buying tanks and buying ships and buying submarines instead of trying to get that 80% solution that already does what we needed to do, and then making it our own, making it military and making it compliant.
Sure.
Hey, David, before we move on, I'd like to pick up that thread for just a second.
Sure.
Because General Guidry mentioned something that I just want to foot stomp. So we talked about leveraging commercial technology all the time, leveraging commercial methodologies. He hit on that. But one of the things that he hit on that I really want to tease out is leveraging commercial cycles. The commercial product cycle is well inside the turn radius of the department's budgeting plan. So oftentimes the technology becomes stale. But even more than that, it's the cycles of the software development that he mentioned. And now there's Kessel Run up in Boston that's getting to that. But that's a new concept for the department to be able to iterate on that rapid of a cadence, which we haven't seen before. So it's not just the technology and the methodology, but also the commercial cycles as well.
Very good. Excellent. And Anu, I'll pose the next question to you. I think they sort of teed up, a few conversations you can have here. And we could probably have you talk for the entire time and learn an awful lot about what Microsoft is currently doing, how they've adapted to the US DoD, how they set up, your specific group, I think is sort of an interesting conversation also. But, just fundamentally, from that industry perspective, how is Microsoft applying new technology or even AI, or what are they doing to collaborate and break down some of those barriers? And again, I think you have a really interesting perspective because one, you speak from an industry perspective, but Microsoft is also one of those companies that not only has their larger, sort of big company, big tech perspective, but you also work with a lot of small companies too. And I see Microsoft as an enabling sort of, company to break down some of those barriers along the way with teams and everything else that you're doing.
Yeah, you're right. The conversation can go multi-threaded pretty quickly. So
sure.
Let's begin with collaboration, right? We understand that Teams and Office 365 is the game in town, right? But it's the foundational collaboration platform that is applicable to the entire DoD. We're deploying it now. We did it for CVR, right? During COVID, we said to the government, you know what? Here's 4 million licenses. Go collaborate. COVID's going to be really hard, right? We can do this, and let's give it to you gratis for an extenuating circumstance, and go accelerate your digital transformation. Right. CVR kickstarted the DoD and the government into high gear. Suddenly people are collaborating. Suddenly people are using technology in ways that they just never thought they would be able to. That is an enormous enabling technology. When we think about what joint all-domain operations means, right? And you're connecting ground vehicle, space, air, sea, all of these platforms together. It is a collaboration of data, certainly, right? You're taking sensor data, shoving it in a data lake, doing some magic to it, and outputting it to a robot. That's a collaborative sort of orchestration that's happening across your platform. which is a platform. It's not labor, to your point. But there's also the making it happen is a collaborative effort, right? You've got programs in Air Force that your traditional SIs have been working for years and years and years that don't talk to, in the same company, to programs in C, right? At NAVC. The two shall never meet kind of thing, right? I've done my traditional business development within Army. I've done my traditional business development within Air Force, and so there isn't this collaborative like stitching together that happens. And so what we're seeing in industry, especially among the tier ones, is a recognition that, oh my goodness, the move toward joint all domain operations is going to eat my lunch, right? I have to transform, I have to change. And so we're seeing that big time. The big guys are absolutely doing what General Guidry's mentioned. They're changing how they're doing business. Now, are they selling labor or are they selling product? I think there's a very unique interplay between government and industry in that respect. So I'll give for instance, we're working on deploying drones across the Navy right now. And there is a partner we're working with, which is an energy fund, to help kickstart the funding mechanism to get this done. DoD can't obligate themselves to pay back a loan. That's really hard for DoD to do. But you can lease equipment, you can lease capability, right? And so that's looking at a different way of doing business that allows you to accelerate and get technology in the door. So now you don't have assets to maintain and assets to manage, but you're really just getting the capability that you want. You're just getting the capability of the drone that takes a look at whatever needs to be done, makes a decision, and then goes to execute on that. That's a very different mindset. And when we start talking to acquisition professionals about it, and we talk to program managers about it, they're like, well, here's my list of requirements, and I don't see that as a gap I have to fill. So go somewhere else, right? And so getting people to change their mindset about how to go after the mission, really accomplish the mission within their AOR is a very, very difficult situation. But it's a conversation that is happening and people are changing. So we see that, and probably not as fast as we want to, we meaning industry and government writ large, but it's happening. I have on my notes here that I wanted to talk about CMMC compliance to cybersecurity maturity model. The cybersecurity aspects of what we're doing, what we're talking about, the digitalization in Industry 4.0 across industry and government, it can't be ignored, right? CMMC is there for a reason. It's because we don't have a very good understanding or confidence in our industrial base that they are in fact securing their networks. And the reason our near peer competitor became a great power competitor is because they've been stealing our IP from our industrial base. So the opportunity to leverage the enormous commercial technologies that we've had and the stuff that we're talking about in terms of the Medici effect, if you will, it has to be protected. And there are applications. I mean, I could talk about Microsoft all day, and that's we have a CMMC play for sure, but in the perspective is that you can't ignore cybersecurity for innovation to have to go hand in hand. And so accelerating that DevSecOps loops together in terms of making sure your application is secure, your infrastructure is secure, you're paying for what needs to be, the infrastructure is just as important as making sure that the mission outcome is applicable too.
And if we have a secure infrastructure, it might be a little bit easier to open up or reduce some of the other barriers if we're working in a safe environment in the first place. That may help to enable, kind of collaborating and bringing folks together a bit more.
Well, so I'm reminded of the IVAS program. I'm not sure if you guys have tracked that. It was a recent release, one of our biggest releases actually at Microsoft, which is enabling the warfighter, right? It's a $26 billion program for augmented reality at the warfighter at the edge. And that program did a couple of things. It took what Mike was talking about in saying, okay, let's take problem statements instead of requirement documents, right? Let's take a few simple problem statements and iterate on them very quickly. So in our discussion, in the outcome of IVAS when we're briefing joint staff, we said, we wouldn't have gotten here if we had a traditional RFP. Just wouldn't have. Would not have worked.
Right.
We had to start
Right.
with simple iterative processes to build quickly and iterate and deploy. And that stemmed all the way down through the supply chain, right? Where there's a secure supply chain element to what we're talking about, which is looking at how do we war game supply chain acquisitions. We just kicked off a team to go look at President Biden's executive order on securing the supply chain from the silicon all the way through, critical materials, all those aspects. CMMC, cybersecurity, is an aspect of that, right? Gaming out, using simulation and modeling to war game the logistics platform, doing things like managing and tracking provenance for your components. All of these things, end-to-end visibility, are part of that program. But if you had tried to bake that into an RFP to begin with, there's just no way it would have been just too massive, right? You would have ended up being at a $100 billion program, and you'd have scrapped it before it even started.
Sure. Very good. Very good. And David Koch, so we'll move on to you. So, Anu talked about some of the issues about these sort of supply chain, right? And that's your expertise within DLA. And you're sort of in an interesting position because, one, the DLA is, everybody thinks of them as distribution logistics, but there is a lot of R&D, and that's sort of the area that you head up for them is, what are those areas of R&D that you're focused on now currently to support and enable, development and innovation, say within your supply chain?
Dave, thank you. And truly, it's an honor to be a part of this panel. And that is a great question that you asked. DLA's top priorities have always been focused on warfighter support in that global logistics supply chain. From food and fuel to clothing to buying spare parts for weapon systems, we support the acquisitioning, the storing, and transporting of that critical material to the warfighter. And one of the biggest contributions and opportunities that we have for innovation is in that sustainment parts for weapon systems and platforms. So our DLA director, Vice Admiral Skubik, she recently recognized this priority when she released her strategic plan that highlights many of our modernization efforts. So first, I want to, for those of you who aren't familiar with DLA, I just want to talk a second about DLA. So we operate much like a private sector firm, right? Except that we're within the government. We use a working capital fund. So DLA sells our products and services, and we incorporate the cost of the entire organization into that cost. It's kind of like a nonprofit would operate. So basically, it's important for us to make sure we're competing like a business, that we offer a quality product when it's needed at a reasonable price. So the agency's modernization perspective, we really have three focuses right now. The first one is optimizing operations. So in other words, we need to simplify and modernize DLA's IT infrastructure, our landscape, for better service and cost effectiveness. We also need to enable emerging technologies, leveraging new and emerging tech to advance our mission and create a culture of innovation for our customers and our workforce. And then finally, we need to empower our people, modernizing capabilities to anticipate future business needs, increase capacity, and shift our focus from operational to more strategic work. So what does that mean for R&D? After all, that's kind of where I sit, right? Well, we're the sandbox of innovation for the agency. The bottom line, we've kind of been at the forefront of all these modernization efforts. We leverage technology solutions, not only to enhance the defense industrial base that supports the DLA sustainment, but also to help our business operations. And the question specifically talking about how do we do, what are we doing with their artificial intelligence and machine learning to help that? So there's three things that I'll talk about there. First of all, better demand forecasting. We think artificial intelligence and machine learning can significantly increase our ability to do demand forecasting. It's easy for high demand items, but for those low and irregular demand items, we think AI and ML can certainly play a big part. Another example is applied market intelligence. By establishing enterprise-wide processes for collecting and assessing information about our market segments, we think we can better serve our customers. And then finally, supply chain risk management. And having sat through today's activities, I've seen some of the other speakers have also touched on that with DLA, but certainly it is a big interest for us to be able to see past that tier one supplier and be able to assess the risk that's out there. So I'd be remiss if I didn't emphasize the criticality of data to successfully implement these AI and ML technologies. We happen to sit in the Information Technology Directorate, but as our CIO likes to say, it's information and technology that are so important to everything we do. So I'll leave you with one thought on this question. And somebody mentioned Industry 4.0 a couple minutes ago. That is so important to what we're trying to do in DLA. We know that we need to modernize to be able to take advantage of that digital content all the way from the acquisition stage that the general's dealing with, all the way through the sustainment. After all, 80% of the cost of the weapon system is going to be in that sustainment phase. So if we can pull that digital content through, we know that we can serve the warfighter better. Thanks for that question.
Very good, excellent. This next round of questioning, we're sort of going to go into an interesting area, and really it has to do with, this is a topic that all four panelists really want to talk about, and I absolutely did as well, because look, let's face it, we're all supporting the DoD, and what is the DoD for? It is to protect and serve, our country. And if we don't acknowledge an actual peer competitor being China, and being, an adversary that we need to address with technology, with advancements in innovation, weapon systems, what do we need to really do here? So I'd like the next round of questions really to be sort of addressing, that as a topic. And starting off with Michael, with you, among, a real competitor such as somebody like China, what's at the top of the list? What are we most concerned about? How is the Chinese innovation system? Let's look at it from a systemic perspective. How is their innovation system different than ours, right? And within DIU, what can you do to help kind of, guide sort of DoD in ways, and how can we collaborate to combat that? What are some of the disparities in volume of talent pools, that we have? How do we make a difference? How do we battle against just the sheer volume of talent that they have? And you're muted, yeah. You're still muted.
Thanks. It's my first video conference. Just kidding. No, I appreciate that question, and I appreciate you bringing it back around to the talent pools. And I'm going to pull on a thread, something that David mentioned right before me, and that's to empower people. When we get to kind of the last half of your question of what we can do different to combat some of these things that would-be adversaries, especially China, is doing. Look, we all recognize we're in an era of great power competition. I talked about the tech race earlier. We think that's the most important front, as I mentioned. And it's not just for the development of tech, but it's the integration of technology and getting that to our men and women in uniform. But even more than that, it is about setting international norms and standards. We want to maintain a leadership role setting those. Excuse me. And it's clear that China is laser focused on transforming their economy through advanced technology. It's an authoritarian state. It's a centrally planned state. So China is able to direct academia, businesses, government to collaborate to achieve a grand scale of technology. They use economic regulation and security policies to attain tech dominance is one of the things they're doing. And their industrial policies are focused on foundational and emerging technologies. They're making, we often hear about the long game. They're making high level, long-term investments in hardware and software in strategic sectors. In fact, they have a program called CivMil Fusion, where commercial technology is immediately made available to their PLA, and that program is overseen by the president. And we have to get folks on our side to want to work with us. One of their weaknesses, though, is also kind of the flip side of that coin of being an authoritarian regime, and that innovation is really, really hard. It's hard to conduct innovation or encourage innovation in a regime like that. But that leads to other things we need to concern ourselves with. Illegal tech transfer, for example, theft of IP are all things that we need to be aware of. But now that's not to say that we should ever copy their model as something of success. In fact, some of the things we need to do is leverage our asymmetric advantage that we have with our partners and allies. And we also need to pause and remember how we got here. I talked about that triangle of academia, industry, and government that birthed Silicon Valley in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And then I also mentioned that same triangle with respect to China. China's directing that collaboration. We had it occur naturally up to get back to that, to maintain our tech leadership position. We have to have that willingness of being an open system. That's allowed us, honestly, to attract world-class talent in the past, and it continues to allow us to attract that. The last thing we want to do is take up a defensive position. No good will come from that, certainly. But we also need to remember our willingness to take chances, to regroup, to iterate, and try that again. The serial entrepreneurship of the US tech ecosystem is something we need to continue to foster there. And our real proven asset, again, is our ability to iterate, like I said, take those risks in development and integration and getting that technology to operations. We need to leverage a whole of government in economic buying power. I talked before briefly about our collaboration with other entities in the innovation ecosystem across the department. We need to continue to do that. But something else that we have engaged in is working with across the interagency. In fact, the US used to be a leader in the drone market. The US is no longer a leader in the drone market. Would-be adversaries have taken over approximately 80% of that. We had a project with 5 domestic and partner allied drone manufacturers that we prototyped, and we were able to get that on GSA table so that other organizations across government, DHS, State Department, FAA, et cetera, can all now focus that and aggregate that economic buying power to some drones to generate a cyber secure domestic drone capability. Also partner with our allies. And we need to learn lessons from that drone example. Like I said, we used to lead the drone industry. China made some strategic changes several years ago, and we didn't fully understand the implications of those. So we need to take a look at those and apply those to 5G, to robotics, to biotech, and keep an eye on what's happening there and make sure that we are outpacing there. We really need to identify those areas that we think are of strategic importance and start making those long-term investments, and even back it up. It's almost a reinvestment in ourselves. Getting back to STEM education at early stages, talking about empowering people and carry that on through. We need to maintain the R&D, like I said, identify those areas that we think are strategically important and continue that investment. And get back to that public-private partnership. Again, like I said, that built Silicon Valley years and years ago. It's nothing new. We just need to get back to it. And in fact, one of our initiatives is called National Security Innovation Capital, funded this year in the 21 appropriations bill. And it's a way to catalyze investment in dual use hardware. Software is underinvested in because of shorter time horizon on returns, quicker returns. And we've found that about 90% of American venture capital goes to software. Hardware companies, we found, particularly those of interest to the department, are underinvested in. And so this is a way to catalyze that investment. Early stage companies oftentimes are in such need of capital. Sometimes they don't have the resources to determine the geographic origins of that capital before some of the nefarious activity takes place that I mentioned before. And the last thing that we need to do, which is why DIU was started, is to make it easier to work with DoD. I talked about the CivMil fusion in China. We have to get companies to want to work with it. And let's face it, it takes some large muscle movements to work with DoD. So we're trying to make that a little bit easier, lower those barriers to entry, get folks in, and then get them onto other contracts, getting that technology into DoD, and help DoD be a sophisticated trading partner with our commercial partners.
Okay.
Yeah,
Very
if I
good.
could just
Thank
add
you,
on to
Mr.
that,
Madsen.
Mike,
Please do.
There is this existing ecosystem, right, with the tier ones and the bigs and the techs like us, that I think small business can tack onto and leverage, because we've got that muscle movement already. We've got the resources. We've got people swarming all over, to sell into DoD, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you find partners like Microsoft who love working with small business and want to, bring our partners to the table, I think that creates that virtuous cycle that we're talking about. I'll also challenge a little bit on the triangle. I think it used to be we had a great private partner, we had a great academic, private, and a government relationship. But the talent pool, to your point, has gone overseas. It used to be we had a great pool of talent, and we would bring offshore talent to kind of fill up our brain trust, and we would continually, innovate and create all of this great ecosystem. We're not doing that anymore because so much of our brain trust is staying overseas, or we're losing our own brain trust to overseas. And so I think there's a challenge that we have to think about very hard. How are we going to incentivize our innovators to stay in the US, to build in the US, to build with the US, and be, to be citizens in the US, to help with DoD, or think about ways that we can leverage sort of international partnerships in ways that we just haven't before. I think those are some big muscle movements we have to really think about in terms of talent pipeline.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, backing up to your first point, the authority that allows DIU to operate favors non-traditionals, but there are also provisions to partner with the traditional defense industrial base. And we have a handful of those arrangements in DIU that would facilitate. But you're right, modernization is going to take all players in DoD. And I couldn't agree more with your talent pool. That's to my point on STEM education. I read a data point somewhere, and I can't remember if it's 8th grade or 5th grade, but if we don't get students in the STEM program by then, we can't get them back into that. And then kind of expand that out to the point that you were making with going overseas. We need to absolutely incentivize folks to enter the STEM ecosystem in the U.S. education system for sure.
Very good. And moving on to General Guidry. So, I mean, we've had a discussion now about the government and sort of the market in the U.S. But there's a big piece here that we really should discuss. And General Guidry, if you can talk to it a little bit, is more of, and it actually goes back when, historically we talked about cyber states, right? And sort of there was a definition for them, I don't know, probably 8 to 10 years ago that was sort of started. And that's morphed significantly. And where it's gone to, I think, is more along the lines of is corporate interests, and there are tech giants that can dominate certain spaces when they want to. And there's tech giants that can also, play well with others and enable things to happen. So where have cyber states evolved to, and how do they influence, sort of technology acceleration for the DoD that we're interested in providing?
This is actually a fun question, and I say it's fun, very serious, and there's a lot of depth of thought that if you look for a definition of cyber state, there really isn't one on the internet. You can Google it, you can look for it, you'll keep finding everything but the definition of a cyber state. But back in 2008, when I wrote my first DoD think piece on the emerging cyber state, what I had in mind was a group with a particular ideology or a group with a particular cause bonding together irrespective of borders and amassing people, resources, currency, communications, and coming together as a collective, and then acting almost as a nation state without borders, negotiating particular deals with certain countries, how they treated different countries, being able to call to arms. These were things like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, or on the more friendly side, perhaps Greenpeace, or organizations like Antifa today, who can amass a large group of people somewhere, anywhere in the country, even though the people organizing it could be in Sweden for all we know. We don't know. the thing is, that's kind of what we had in mind. And when I wrote about the emerging cyber state, it was more about how they're going to find a platform. They're going to then use that platform to convey the ideas of their own ideology. And if you move forward, and that's true, those exist, but if you move forward, what I didn't really fully envision was the idea that the platform itself could be the thing that actually amasses the collective of people and creates the digital narrative, and that actually influences the population such that, you know, what you used to call, I think back in the 70s, they called them, you know, the global multinational monolithic corporations. You know, the idea that you had these multinational corporations that were so big that they could influence government. Well, in many ways, some of the tech giants now have that capability without attributing any nefarious intentions or actions.
Sure,
You
sure,
know,
but
make no mistake.
how does
Go
that
ahead.
interact with sort of the multinational aspect also? I mean,
Well,
considering the,
it
you know,
does. Exactly. And that was exactly where I was heading with this, because you think
Right.
about a large global tech firm, and if they want to enter into the Chinese market, which is in fact a totalitarian, you know, centrally planned, centrally led country,
right.
you may have to agree to things to do business with China because your citizens, i.e. shareholders, are demanding it. And you need to grow your Chinese influence. So you may agree to things with China that are to the detriment of US national security. And
Right.
and make no mistake, a chairman that decides out of the kindness of his heart to always favor US national security over the best interests of his board of directors and shareholders may not be the CEO for very long. Because at the end of the day, profits drive. And all of the companies, if you look at the top 10 tech giants, you know, we think of them as American firms. They were created here, but their headquarters could be anywhere. Their tax state could be anywhere. They have the ability to negotiate with different nation states and to literally up and move. You know, you have some, you know, even in the microcosm, moving from California to Colorado because they're voting with their dollars. And so the question is now, if that meets the definition of a cyber state, an entity that has resources, that doesn't really
It has
exist.
changed.
It's right. If that's the case, then how does the United States buy technology from a firm that for its own best self-interests must sell the very latest and greatest to our peer competitors? And they must, or else their economic model doesn't work. So all of those that are intending to grow into the Chinese market will be subject to the demands of a centrally led, centrally run state. And that will impact how we should view them. Because I, for one, love the idea of having the best software. But if I know that my adversary has the very same software, I might, for security purposes alone, choose a less favorable product so that I could actually secure it and keep that unknown to my adversaries. And so that is sort of the big piece that I think that I don't have any answers for, but I will tell you, it stays on my mind. How do you deal with that dynamic, no matter how much we love some of these companies?
Very good, very good. And all corporations are different, and they, you know, very purposefully, they set up structures in order to deal with those different markets and different environments. And you know, certainly, you know, most big tech companies, you know, sometimes they align, you know, that way, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they partition, sometimes they don't. And Anu, you and I have talked about this before, and you know, Microsoft has sort of a unique approach to what they're doing, especially even your organization, of how they're addressing the DoD marketplace. So how has Microsoft organized, you know, to support the US DoD? You know, considering it is a big tech multinational, but you know, what else is Microsoft doing within the defense intelligence space, so that, that people may or may not be familiar with, regarding any tactical implementations or actual, work that you're doing within the DoD?
Sure. It's a good, incisive question, and we're talking about. And for the record, we almost bought TikTok, right? Like, right. So,
Well, yeah, that's a great example. No, seriously. I mean, that's, and that's one that's even hard to get, break away from the kids, but they don't necessarily realize all the eyes that might be seeing through to what they're doing online every day,
Right, exactly that. And it is an influence. It's influence on our next generation. And so those are things we have to think about in terms of our own responsibilities as citizens, right? And as well as corporate citizens too. What I'll say for Microsoft, I think we've been pretty clear from the beginning, and Satya has been very open about his support and our board's support for supporting the DoD. We have always maintained that we are a U.S. company on U.S. soil, and so we will defend and support the nation's laws, or we will support the nation's laws and defense, right? That is within our corporate responsibility to do. And I have some books up on the back here. One is called Tools and Weapons, and to your point, Rob, there's this idea that technology is ever evolving, and your adversary will always come up with or steal your idea or weapon, right? And so this idea that you have to have less or more secure, less capable, AI models than, say, your adversary, I think is something that we grapple with, and I know our counterparts grapple with within DoD all the time. It's okay, how do I get this into a FedRAMP environment or into a secret environment? There's a lot of goodies that I have in commercial environment that I don't get in a secure classified environment. I mean, the joke has always been, I get, yesterday's technology tomorrow for secret, right? That's a problem. It's a huge problem. How do you innovate faster when you're working with 20-year-old technology? That's the cycle we have to speed up. So we are devoted to it. We are enabling the DoD. From Microsoft's standpoint, we stood up Microsoft Federal so that our organization is sort of cordoned off from commercial, in the sense that the sharing of information is one way from commercial in, but we have some strict processes about how we share information out to broader Microsoft. Those are all things that we've done to, demonstrate that we are in it, in the fight with you guys. Other technology areas that we can get into, but ultimately it's about multi-domain operations. So we have solutions around 5G in space and manufacturing and ground vehicles, and essentially taking the expensive and difficult engineering solutions from the 80s and 90s and democratizing them, right? That is taking that embedded system that was gobs of money and gobs of labor, and now suddenly your citizen developer can roll it out within hours. That's the business that we're in, and we're accelerating that. So happy to have a conversation. I know we're coming up on time, so I don't want to take up too much time talking about Microsoft.
This is well worth it. This is well worth it. Thank you. And that's sort of one of the things that does separate us out, or separates out democracies from other types of governments, where we can, reach out to the masses and democratize technologies and use that as work to our strengths, right? Work to our skills and what we can use and bring to bear. And sometimes those things can counteract, masses of people being thrown at problems that are centralized. And David, so we'll finish up with you for the last question. I mean, a lot of this does have to do with supply chain. So what kind of challenges do we have, within the supply chain? And talk about, if you can, domestically or potentially, non-domestic sources. What issues do we have with securing those supplies, and what might these initiatives, look like, that when they're affected, say by counterfeit goods or by bad actors within the supply chain?
No, great question, and I can touch on that pretty easily. So DLA does manage end-to-end supply chain requirements from the initial acquisition of weapon systems all the way through their disposal at the end of their life cycle. So the challenges and risks to our global supply chain are focused in various areas, and I'm going to highlight 3 of them. Establishing and maintaining domestic manufacturing capabilities to ensure our parts are qualified, reliable, and meet performance specs. Very tough in today's environment with more and more industrial capability going overseas. 2, securing domestic sources of materials to include finding those rare earth minerals. And 3, expanding the visibility, that supply chain visibility that we need to really run an efficient supply chain. So kind of onto that first question, the first part of it, the manufacturing capabilities. R&D tech data and additive manufacturing programs are really mitigating those supply chain vulnerabilities in addressing counterfeit and non-conformance of parts. As more non-traditional and manufacturing capabilities are introduced into that supply chain, we're working with the DoD and the military services to ensure that the parts have quality assurance, data integrity, and security for retrieval and proper management of the tech data package throughout the life cycle of that weapon system. So this approach includes kind of several things, making sure we've kind of automated the requirements, making sure we have iterative qualifications. In other words, we can normalize and standardize the tech data packages, including additive manufacturing tech data packages, so that all the services can use them. Making sure we have authoritative data that we can share, and ensuring that we have repeatable processes that drive all the way through the contracting process. So the second area that I want to talk about is securing domestic sources of materials, and that's so important to the supply chain. So in addition to qualifying the parts that reach DLA supply chains, we're also identifying, developing, authenticating sources of supply. So rare earths is a good example of that. Our small business office is working with IDIS, the Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment Office, to develop domestic sources of rare earth permanent magnets and alternatives to rare earth magnets. As some of you may know, the rare earth magnets are in a bunch of weapon systems that are out there, leaving us vulnerable to one country's supply and disruptions or price increases for them. So this requirement really looks at how can we possibly recycle some of the magnets that are out there, recapture some of that material and use it again. In addition to counterfeit risk, we're also tracking and tracing components from the source of supply chain all the way to the end user as a key factor. And we're partnering with OEMs really to identify high-risk microelectronic components to employ safe, state-of-the-art track and trace procedures. We think that that can be helpful. So as a side note, the Defense Logistics Agency, we stockpile 42 different commodities with a market value of about 1.1 billion, all kind of in that rare earth area. And we've been proactive about strengthening the production, especially for those rare earth elements. And it's important to maintain the resilience of the supply chain that we have those elements available. So the third area that I want to mention really is that supply chain management. And it's really important that we develop standard, repeatable processes to continually and comprehensively assess across the DLA supply chains, devising a means to be able to see those supply chain risks, to be able to have that situational awareness, do some risk reduction processes, and then basically guide the decision-making so that we can keep our supply chain secure. So one concluding thought on this question, collectively R&D's efforts in mitigating supplies and reducing risk is so important to the industrial base. So we got to stay focused on ensuring we remain agile and resilient to balance the new material development and also looking at procurement for innovation and collaboration. Thanks.
Very good, thank you. So gentlemen, we're at 3:45 now. We've got about 5 minutes left. We've got time to go around the horn one last time. Each of you have a minute. I mean, we've talked about a lot of different things as far as breaking down barriers and innovation and collaboration, as well as competing against, peer adversaries. So, please, we can start off with Mike. You got 1 minute, go for it.
Awesome, great. Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Appreciate this discussion too. So for everyone in the audience, the non-traditionals, the small businesses, the systems integrators, the traditional defense vendors, we want to work with you. It's going to take everyone to modernize the department. So we definitely want to work with you. We have solicitations out right now. We're a joint organization with a unique product cycle celebrating 5 years. We've been successful at lowering barriers in the past, and now we're looking out in front of us. And a lot of themes have come up today that we're already starting to look at. The international piece. We're looking at increasing that international engagement to work with the partner and allies in their ecosystem, as well as for our vendor base to be able to sell to our partners and allies out there. We recognize that the security clearance piece is a problem for a lot of the non-traditional folks, and we want to get past admiring that problem and actually get after it and start figuring that out. So we're spending some time thinking about those areas, as well as making our successful prototypes more widely available to other DoD partners to see what has been successful and put that out there. And again, just to reiterate what I said before, it's going to take all players in this tech race. We need to reinvest in ourselves. We talked about the talent pool we need to get after, continued R&D investment, and making DoD a more sophisticated partner for our commercial partners. Really enjoyed the discussion and look forward to continuing this conversation forward.
Very good. Rob?
Yeah, in my first few years in the Army, I went from driving Jeeps to Humvees. I went from flying Hueys to Blackhawks. I went from PRC 77s to Singars radios. In a 5-year period, we got Apaches, we got new fighter aircraft, we got new technology in submarines. I went from jungle fatigues to BDUs we transformed not just the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the whole way we fought in a 5-year period in the 1980s. And real quick, the next 25 years, we consolidated those gains. There weren't a lot of major changes. What I will tell you that I'm seeing right now in the last 3 years is that we are gearing up for the type of transformation that we saw in the 1980s with DIU and Army Futures Command and others. I think that we are going to speed up our pace of modernization tremendously. I hope that my career lasts long enough to continue to see the goodness that comes from it.
So building that critical mass and breaking down those barriers and getting everybody kind of working alongside, that's fantastic. Thank you. Next, Anu, final remarks?
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. It was a great meeting my peers and having a discussion. I think this is a fantastic forum. We need more of these kinds of thought leadership, especially out in the public domain, to have some really critical discussion on how we can move faster. And then execution. OTAs are fantastic. SBIRs are fantastic. More contract vehicles are fantastic. Partner with Microsoft. We're here. We're not big and scary. We actually do love partners, and we're here to help you. Look me up and let's go break down some walls.
Excellent. Thank you. And David.
All right. Yeah. Just thank you for inviting me to be part of this esteemed panel. Definitely has been an honor on my part. I want to reassure everyone that Defense Logistics Agency is established a strong reputation for helping the warfighter in our nation, and we're committing to making sure that we're staying up with those latest changes and accelerating our R&D to ensure that we can meet the warfighter's demands. To do that, collaboration with our partners is what we have to do, whether it's a small partner, whether it's a large OEM, whether it's academia, or sometimes we work with manufacturing institutes. We take all of them and partner with them to try to deliver capability to the warfighter as fast as we can. So again, thank you for letting me participate. It's definitely an honor to be part of this group.
Fantastic, thank you. And thank you, panelists. I really appreciated you coming together and supporting this effort with America's Future Series. It was a very informative session. It was good for me. I enjoyed it. I had fun. Thank you very much. And I think the audience probably got something out of it too. It gives, whenever you're giving those insights and you're able to tell stories or give examples, I think it's very, very helpful. So again, thank you so much. And we'll hand it back to headquarters back in America's Future Series. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David. Thank you all for your participation and your contributions. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's one thing I wanted to touch on a little bit before we go to a very short break, which is Brigadier General Guidry made a point about during his career in the 80s, he noticed he experienced a burst of innovation and changes, et cetera, and advancements, and then a lot of quiescence and some consolidation, and that we're on the verge here, hopefully, of another burst of that kind of innovation. That has to happen. We cannot continue at this pace. And one of the things that just is in my mind illuminating around that as an important example is the notion of rare earth metals. The Chinese control that. They have the greatest control of that. We have some here in California. There's some in Australia. There's some in Canada. But we have barriers that keep us from mining those. And so we are either going to have to figure out a way to get the state of California and the federal government to be willing to mine for rare earth metals, which is messy, so that we can compete with that, or we have to innovate so radically that we don't need rare earth metals, that there are alternatives. So we need to leapfrog past that. But failure is not an option. It is not an option to say, oh, we can't get rare earth metals, we're falling behind, they have them, we don't. We owe it to our warfighters, and we owe it to our children and their children's children to figure out a way to overcome these kind of obstacles on our watch, not kick the can down the road and hope that maybe somebody else solves it. It has to happen now. So I'm really honored to be associated with anything that brings these kinds of people that have these kind of capabilities and are dedicated to breaking the needle off in the backsides of our near peers, not just moving the needle. So thank you everyone for participating in this. Thank you for David for leading it. We're going to take a real quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to start closing out our program. We've got a lot more great programming to go, but please come back here in about 3 minutes.